We're going to talk about the Progressive Era. This was an era in United States history where the government began to get involved in trying to correct rights or wrongs that had been caused on the American people. So we're going to look at how this era started, and it's pretty simple. There were huge problems in this country, what we've talked about, with the rich having a large percentage of the money and left very little money for the poor to have, and working conditions, and et cetera. We've talked about all this stuff before. The big problems were this. The majority of people in this country are making very, very little money, not even a living wage, living in extreme poverty. The working conditions were terrible for workers. The living conditions for families were awful. This is just a regular shop, a shop where they're making clothes, a textile shop. Here's an alleyway. If you can see this creepy kid right here. There was corruption in politics, so that the politicians were not doing things better for people. The politicians were mostly getting money from businesses. So a lot of people believe that private charity would not do enough and could not do enough to help improve the lives of the citizens who were living in such squalor. So the government began to step in. And there were different types of progressives, and progressives were people who wanted to improve the lives of workers, improve the lives of the poor, make school available for more people, get the vote for people. There were social, there were moral, economic, and political progressives. The social progressives wanted to change society and make it better for everybody. The moral progressives wanted to do things like outlaw some of the vices, some of the problems like drinking and even prostitution, which wasn't illegal in a lot of places. The economic progressives wanted to increase the wages and the conditions of working for most people, and political progressives wanted to clean up politics. The beliefs of them were simple. The government should be more accountable to the citizens, all the citizens, not just the rich citizens. That the power of the wealthy should be weakened by the government, because a lot of people felt that the wealthy were really running the country, not the government. That the government should have more power to help average citizens. What is the most powerful entity in the country? Well, it should be the government, which should stand between citizens and business and help citizens. And finally, that the government should be less corrupt, and if it was less corrupt, it could become more effective. So how is that going to happen? Well, it began with writers, reporters mostly, who began to alert the public to problems. They began to tell the public about problems in the meatpacking industry, which was a book by Upton Sinclair called The Jungle, which was unsanitary and disease-ridden. These people were called muckrakers. They were uncovering problems, uncovering scandals. Some of them were exaggerating, but most of the muckrakers were just talking about the average things. Sinclair Lewis, or Upton Sinclair, was not exaggerating anything. Another book that was written at this time by a gentleman named Ida Tarbell was A History of the Standard Oil Company, which talked about how corrupt it was and what effect it had on the government. These began to shape public opinion against businesses and against companies, and were more in favor of the government coming in and stopping these companies from doing these bad things. So these reform groups, the main one was unions and labor reform. They were the ones who went on strike and organized. They were still, for the last 100 years prior to progressive reforms, they had been fighting and were still fighting for workers' rights. There was a new political movement in this country called the Socialist Movement. Eugene V. Debs was a Socialist Party candidate who was arrested for organizing on the railroads, and was actually thrown in jail. And from jail, as a Socialist Party candidate, he got a million votes, over 1 million votes. And the Socialists wanted government to control more money and more property, and then they would distribute that equally throughout the United States to the poor and rich alike. That idea is today too extreme for a majority of the people, and back then, even though people were looking for something different, even that was a little extreme for the majority of Americans.